Ever wondered what makes a place consistently rank, right at the top for families? What really goes into creating a community that's not just good, but maybe exceptional? Today, we're taking deep dive into Fairfax County, Virginia. It's a place you often hear hailed as ideal for families. But what does ideal truly mean? And who is it ideal for?
That's exactly what we're trying to get at today. We've pulled together some really fascinating sources. There's a recent study, for example, naming Fairfax County a top spot for new families.
Yeah.
And there's this really candid online discussion we found about what people really look for when they move with kids.
Right, the ground truth, sort of.
Exactly. Yeah. And crucially, we're also looking at the official Fairfax County Park Authority policy manual. Sounds dry, maybe, but it's revealing. And the Fairfax County Health Department's 2023 Community Health Assessment.
Okay, so our goal here is to unpack the layers, get
Right.
beneath that polished exterior of Fairfax County. We'll look at the meticulous planning you mentioned, the parks, public art too, but also the more complex realities, community health, governance. We want to explore the why behind those high rankings, definitely, but also, confront the challenges and complexities you'd find in any large, diverse place. It's about getting the full picture, maybe even the surprising parts.
Okay, so let's unpack this with the big headline. SmartAsset's 2025 study looked at, 830 U.S. counties, and it named Fairfax County, Virginia, the best place for new families. That's a big statement.
It really is. And the study points to a few key reasons, key pillars supporting that. Affordability, for one. Now, childcare costs, they average about 24% of the median income for a family with two kids. And housing comes in just under 20% of the median income. Those are, pretty significant numbers for young families.
Yeah, they really are. And it's always interesting to compare those nationally, isn't it? Because Fairfax stands out, sure, but the sources show some southern counties actually have even lower relative childcare costs.
Right. Fauquier County, also in Virginia, is just over 11%. Or Williamson County in Tennessee, Oldham County, Kentucky, both around 12%. So it just shows, even within good numbers, there's a whole spectrum out there.
Absolutely. And you see the same thing with healthcare access. Fairfax County looks great. One primary care doctor for every 898 residents. That's way better than the national median, which is over 1,500.
Wow. Yeah.
But then you look somewhere like Olmsted County, Minnesota, that ratio drops even more, just 432 people per primary care doc. So Fairfax is doing really well, but it's good to have that broader context.
Definitely. But the thing that really jumped out at me from that smart asset study was the park access. A remarkable 96% of Fairfax County residents live within a half mile of a park. 96%.
It's almost unbelievable.
It's like universal access to green space. The study even mentioned how some big cities, power cities like San Francisco, New York, even though they have fewer young kids relatively, they also have super convenient park access. Families are almost always just a short walk away.
That 96% figure for park access. It almost sounds too good to be true, right? It really makes you pause and think, how does a place actually achieve that? And this is where you start to see the real intentionality behind Fairfax County.
Right.
These stats, especially the parks one, they point to deliberate planning, serious investment, careful management. It's not accidental. These are the concrete things studies measure. But like you said, what does it really take to create and maintain that kind of system?
Yeah.
Or manage health for such a big, diverse population? That's where we need to dig deeper.
Exactly. That smart asset study points right to that incredible park access. So to really get it, we need to understand the system behind it. The Fairfax County Park Authority. This isn't just, hey, we have some parks. It's about how they're set up, protected, managed, like vital public assets.
Right. And this authority, it wasn't just formed yesterday. It was created by the County Board of Supervisors way back in 1950. It operates under a specific state law, the Virginia Park Authorities Act. What's important is their policy manual last updated in 2023, so it's current. It explicitly guides all their decisions to match their mission. It's not just rules on a shelf. It's like a living framework for long-term care.
So it's a highly structured operation, a clear vision, not just a random collection of green spots. The park authority director is the one interpreting and implementing policy, and the staff handle the day-to-day procedures.
That's right. And they don't just set it and forget it. Policies get reviewed, updated every 5 years. That ensures they keep up with the county's needs as things change.
Okay.
And that idea of public trust is baked right in. Any money the authority gets is specifically called trust funds, meaning it can only be used for park purposes, exactly as the Act outlines. That structure really emphasizes this deep sense of public stewardship, like these parks are precious things being held for everyone, for the future.
That's a really powerful way to think about it, like shared heirlooms. And Their approach to the parks themselves, it's incredibly detailed. They have this whole classification system. It's tiered, right? Starting with the smaller neighborhood spots, community parks, they call them, often near schools, good for just a quick visit, a playground trip.
Exactly. Then you've got district parks. These are bigger, 50 to 200 acres. They serve a wider area, combining like lighted sports fields, maybe a rec center with more natural areas too,
Mm.
for longer visits.
Okay. And then the really big ones, countywide parks. Those are about protecting significant natural environments, historical sites.
Right. And even within that category, there are distinctions. Natural resource parks' focus is preserving sensitive ecosystems. Public use has to be compatible. Think visitor centers on the edge, hiking trails. Then cultural resource parks, preserving and interpreting historical sites. Education's a big part there. And stream valley or greenway parks, protecting waterways, habitat, but also providing trails for recreation, biking, walking.
Wow, it's like a whole ecosystem of different types of green space all planned out.
It really is. And this level of control, this meticulous planning, it shows a deep commitment to preservation and public benefit over the long haul. For instance, the regulations are super clear. Parks belong to the people. For recreation, enjoyment, and preservation. The rules exist to protect the resources, keep people safe, and make sure everyone can enjoy them.
And they're pretty serious about protecting the parkland itself, aren't they? There's a policy you mentioned about resisting any attempt to damage, destroy, or illegally encroach on parkland. That covers everything from like mowing your lawn onto park property or planting stuff there to dumping debris or building trails without permission.
Yeah, extending your garden, things like that.
Right. And they even say they expect voluntary compliance by park neighbors. It highlights that it's a shared responsibility.
Absolutely. And the universal rules for park use are just as important, like hours of operation generally, 30 minutes before sunrise to 30 minutes after sunset,
And
unless you have special permission.
standard stuff, but clearly defined.
Exactly. And there's a list of prohibited activities. Damaging historic artifacts, obviously. Operating motorized vehicles off-road, unless it's a motorized wheelchair where pedestrians are allowed.
Yeah.
Even things like swimming. You can't just jump into any pond or a stream. Only allowed in official park authority pools or water parks during posted hours.
Okay, so it's managed for broad public use, not just, whatever someone feels like doing.
Precisely. It keeps the resources protected and usable for everyone. And things like alcohol, you need a specific permit for public events, and consumption is only allowed in designated areas chosen with safety in mind.
All right, here's where I think it gets really interesting. It's not just the green space itself, but how thoughtfully they curate everything within that space. Like, take public art. It's not just an afterthought. It's a deliberate part of their strategy. Sculpture, murals, photography, even artistic benches, fountains.
And what's really striking is how they acquire this art. It can be through public funds, donations, maybe even as a community benefit from a private developer. But no matter what, the park board has to approve the funding. It's this rigorous process. It shows they value cultural enrichment as a funded, deliberate public service, not just a nice to have.
And they have pretty strict criteria for what art they actually acquire, right? They want unique, high-quality pieces that really connect with the location, the architecture, the history, the natural setting.
Yes, context is key. And
Yeah.
accessibility is huge. AD compliance, of course, but also aiming for the broadest and most equitable public access possible. They even consider community reaction acceptance or opposition. And crucially, they have to secure the maintenance funds when they acquire the art. They're thinking long-term.
That's smart. So the art doesn't just fall into disrepair. And ownership is interesting, too. The park authority owns the physical piece, but the artist keeps the copyright.
Generally, yes. The authority gets rights to use images for promotion, education, that sort of thing. And there are protections for artists under the Visual Artists' Rights Act, VARA, against modification or destruction, although artists can waive those rights in a contract. Even if they decide to deaccession art, remove it from the collection, they need an agreement with the artist beforehand, and the artist gets notified and has input during the process.
Wow, that's quite detailed. Shows respect for the art and the artist.
It does. And that meticulous approach carries right over into historic preservation. They use 4 different strategies. Pure preservation, just maintaining existing materials. Rehabilitation, allowing changes for new uses but keeping the historic character. Restoration, taking a property back to a specific time period. And even reconstruction, recreating lost parts for interpretation.
So they have a whole toolkit depending on the specific site and goal.
Exactly. And it's not just specific buildings. They're committed to countywide archaeology, too. identifying, evaluating, preserving archaeological resources all across Fairfax, often partnering with volunteers, local groups, professional archaeologists. It's a real community effort to uncover those hidden stories.
That's fascinating. And it's not just inanimate objects either, right? You mentioned live collections?
Yes, farm animals, captive wild animals, horticultural plants, all managed for educational purposes. These collections are carefully evaluated. Can the park authority provide proper care, meeting professional standards? Do the animals or plants fit the scope of their collection? And generally, they don't collect threatened or endangered species unless it's part of a specific program to help restore native populations.
And underpinning all of this is a strong code of ethics, particularly for their museum operations.
A very strong code emphasizes stewardship, public trust. For example, if they sell something that's been deaccessioned, the money has to go back into buying new items or conserving existing ones, reinvesting public assets. And importantly, no park authority board members, staff, or their immediate families can buy those deaccessioned items. Zero conflict of interest.
That really highlights their commitment to managing these public resources ethically. It's impressive.
Okay, so we've seen this meticulous planning for the physical spaces, the governance, but that best place label for families also involves things like schools and healthcare. Let's shift gears a bit, talk about the human element, the deeper social dynamics maybe. That online discussion about good schools you mentioned, that provides a really interesting kind of raw perspective.
It really does. What's fascinating and maybe a bit uncomfortable is how parents in that discussion define good schools.
Good.
It's clearly way more than just academics or resources. A huge factor mentioned again and again was the peer group.
Parents were explicitly looking for communities where the kids came from, and I'm quoting here. High IQ, educated, married, rich, pro-intellectualist, peaceful, law-abiding, sober, well-connected parents.
Wow, that's
Right.
very specific and blunt.
Extremely, one person flat out said. Choosing school district is basically choosing neighbors.
That hits hard, doesn't it?
It does. Another parent talked about stretching their budget to move from a neighborhood with a low-rated school to one with a top-rated elementary. And they noted the difference wasn't just resources, but critically, the values and expectations of the peer group.
So it's less about the school building itself and more about the social environment, the social capital that comes with it.
That seems to be the strong undercurrent. The idea is parenting matters most, then the peer group, then the school district itself. The peers influence social values, future outlook.
Okay, so if that's how some people are defining good, this very specific, almost exclusionary view, how does that square with the reality of a large, diverse county like Fairfax? What does it mean for families who don't fit that specific mold or, frankly, can't afford to choose their neighbors in that way?
And that's exactly where the Fairfax County Health Department's 2023 Community Health Assessment comes in. It adds this crucial layer of reality. Because while the county scores high overall, there are significant disparities hiding beneath that average.
Okay, like what?
Well, poverty, for instance.
Right.
Overall, about 6.1% of residents are below the federal poverty level. Seems okay, maybe, but break it down. It's 10.8% for Black African-American residents, 10.3% for Hispanic Latino residents. Compare that to 4% for white residents.
Big difference.
Huge. And nearly 17% for non-citizen residents. So that average number hides vastly different experiences.
And how's...
Similar story. Black, African-American, Asian, and Hispanic Latino households are way more likely to live in overcrowded conditions compared to white households. And the burden of high housing costs. Its geographically concentrated southern and central parts of the county feel it much more.
The assessment also included community voices, right? What did they say?
Yeah, that was powerful. Residents talked about immigrants, for example, how their education or professional certifications from back home often aren't recognized here. So you have skilled people forced into much lower paying jobs, facing intense competition. It's a cycle of underemployment.
That's incredibly frustrating.
It is. And then you look at health outcomes, specifically premature death. Top causes are chronic diseases, COVID, substance use, suicide, accidents, pretty standard maybe. But the disparities are stark. Cancer, for instance. Black African-American residents might have lower rates of new diagnoses sometimes,
Okay.
but their mortality rates from cancer are higher. The assessment points to later stage diagnoses, suggesting barriers to getting screened early, getting timely treatment.
So systemic issues impacting survival.
Seems likely.
Yeah.
Look at diabetes. Age-adjusted death rates. Highest in the Black African-American community. Hospitalizations for diabetes. Over 4.5 times higher for Black African-American residents compared to Asian and Hispanic Latino residents. These aren't small gaps.
No, they're huge. What about mental health? That often gets overlooked.
It was flagged as a top concern in the assessment, especially for Black African American communities, young people, immigrants, older adults. Stigma is a massive barrier, particularly, again, for Black African American communities. It stops people from seeking help.
And the youth perspective.
Young people see it, they're aware of depression, anxiety among their friends, and many explicitly link mental health struggles to opioid use. The youth survey data from 2022 is sobering. Nearly 29% of 8th, 10th, and 12th graders reported feeling sad or hopeless for 2 weeks or more.
Almost a third. Wow.
Yeah, and that number skyrockets for certain groups. Non-binary students, gay, lesbian, bisexual students, over 55% for some of those groups. And Hispanic Latino students were also higher, around 34%.
That's deeply concerning.
And tragically, you see potential consequences. Unintentional, non-fatal opioid-related ER visits for kids under 18. They more than doubled just between 2021 and 2022.
Doubled in 1 year. That's alarming.
It really is. Shows a crisis deepening quickly. And these health issues connect to lifestyle factors, too, where we also see disparities.
Like diet and exercise.
Exactly. Physical activity, Black African American and Hispanic Latino students are more than twice as likely as white students to say they don't get 60 minutes of activity daily. Healthy eating Black African American students are over 2.5 times more likely than white students to report eating no vegetables in the past week.
No vegetables at all.
In the past week, yeah. In food insecurity, while the overall number reporting hunger is relatively low, under 7%, it's much higher for Hispanic Latino students, 12.1%, Black African American students, 9.4%, and Asian students, 5.3%, compared to white students, 2.8%.
So again, that overall average hides the real struggle for specific groups.
Precisely. And community members pointed out issues with food aid, too. Sometimes emergency food lacks fresh produce, is highly processed. And the eligibility rules for food programs, they might not actually match the level of need people are experiencing.
Gotcha. And finally, maternal and child health. That's often a key indicator.
A critical one, and again, disparities. Low birth weight, 7% of all births in 2022. But the risk is much higher for non-white women. Black African American women had the highest rate, 10%.
10% low birth weight.
And tragically, infant mortality rates are also highest for Black African American women, 5.95 deaths per 1,000 births. And perhaps most chillingly, the assessment captured community voices talking about medical racism.
Wow.
Some Black African American women expressed fear, even a desire to avoid pregnancy altogether, because they're aware of these poor outcomes and they mistrust the medical system. Some are turning to alternative care, like doulas, seeking systems they feel safer in.
That speaks volumes about the depth of the problem.
It really does. So it brings us back to this central tension, doesn't it?
Yeah.
How do these deep, persistent health and social disparities line up with the county being ranked the best place? What does best really mean if these significant challenges exist, hitting certain communities much harder, even within a place with so many resources?
Yeah. So wrapping this up, what does it all mean? We've seen this picture, right? A county that's highly rated, incredibly well-resourced in some ways, especially its public spaces, meticulous planning. But we've also uncovered these significant gaps, these challenges beneath the surface that impact different parts of the population very differently. It really highlights that best isn't a universal experience, is it?
Not at all. It's such a powerful reminder that any best place, ranking, any headline number, it's just the start of the story. It's just scratching the surface. To really understand a place, you have to look deeper than the stats, beyond the shiny policies. You need to examine the detailed data, listen to all the different voices in the community, and really acknowledge that even in top-rated places, profound inequities can and do persist.
Okay, so here's maybe a final thought for you, the listener, to chew on. We've seen the incredible precision, the intentionality that Fairfax County applies to its parks, its public art, its historic sites. Like every bench, every tree seems considered. So how could that same level of deliberate planning, that same ethical stewardship they apply to Parkland, be brought to bear on dismantling these systemic health and social inequities we've talked about? How could the rigor they use for managing parks extend to a broader vision, a vision for genuine social equity, better health outcomes, real well-being for everyone across the whole county? It's really a question, isn't it? How does a community that demonstrably excels in managing its physical assets elevate its commitment to fairness and access for all its human residents?